Hi, I'm Jean Shafiroff, and I'm on a mission. Anyone can be a philanthropist. My television show came from my book, Successful Philanthropy: How to Make a Life by What You Give. Won't you join me? Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff, and this show is designed to highlight philanthropic leaders here in the United States and then beyond. With us today, Judith Kasen-Windsor. She's a businesswoman, an LGBTQ activist and advocate. Let's all welcome Judith Kasen-Windsor. Judith?
Thank you for having me, Jean. It's good to see you.
Now, Judith, you were the longtime partner of Edie Windsor, and also you were her spouse for, I think, a year. Can you tell our audience a little bit about exactly who Edie Windsor was and why she's so important for the LGBTQ community and their marriage and the future of all of us?
You know, I couldn't be more proud of Edie Windsor. You know, Edie Windsor was about the statue of you. You know, she was tiny, but she was fierce. And Edie did not accept, you know, the injustice and the lack of dignity that she and her partner of 44 years, and then me and her partner, you know, things had changed at that point. But she was with someone for 44 years, and the law and society did not accept them as a couple, and she could not stand the injustice, and she couldn't really stand the injustice for any civil rights group. You know, that's why she really didn't consider herself a great feminist. She was really about civil rights and rights for all individuals.
Yes, and she's famous for changing marriage laws, specifically getting legislation passed that would allow same-sex marriage. Can you discuss that a little bit so that our audience has a better idea of who she was and how hard she worked to change the legislation?
Yeah, Edie was the first marriage equality ambassador for New York for Empire State Pride Agenda, starting about 25 years ago. Like a long time she worked on marriage equality. You know, people talk a lot about the federal law. You know, when the federal law, Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996. When he signed it in 1996, Edie and Thea had already been together for 30 years. So that was quite painful for them. And again, you know, she believed in this country, she believed in the Constitution, and she just couldn't stand it. And then what put her over the edge was when Thea passed away, where they had built a life together. They had bought an apartment together. They had bought this lovely home in Southampton together. When Thea passed away, you know, Edie was suing the United States government on behalf of the Thea Spire estate. So she had to pay, and everybody talks about the $363,000 that she paid in federal taxes. She also, even though marriage was legal in 2011 in New York State, and she had to pay $256,000 to the state. So it was well over $500,000.
So let's backtrack a little. Can you explain specifically to our audience what DOMA was, the Defense of Marriage Act, so that our audience can understand what that was and why she was against that?
Okay, the Defense of Marriage Act is in, I mean, we can get really technical and legal, but the Defense of Marriage Act defined marriage as between one male and one female. And that was the law that she went after.
And exactly what was she able to change about that, and when? And how many years did it take her?
About 2.5. You know, she had to go through, you know, the New York Circuit Court. She had to go to the New York State Supreme Court. And then, you know, I it's not a joke, but it is, you know, to get a Supreme Court case, it's like finding a needle in a double haystack. You know how hard it is to get a Supreme Court case, and how they picked Windsor, I don't know, but they did. And when they picked it, they called her the perfect plaintiff. She was absolutely the perfect plaintiff for this case.
I remember reading about this on the cover of the New York Times. What year was this exactly? I can't remember the exact year.
She started the case in about 2010, 2011, and she did the oral arguments in the end of March 2013, and the decision came down on June 26, 2013.
And that was a very big day for the LGBTQ
Huge day.
community because
I don't
all
know
of
if
a
anybody
sudden-
didn't cry.
Yes. So now I want to go back to your life a little bit
Sure.
and how you met Judith. And in our conversations, you mentioned to me that, I'm sorry, Edith always wanted to keep the relationship very quiet. What was that for? Was she afraid, or what was that exactly?
When we were talking about that, it was really when she was with Thea, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. You had to be very, very careful about being gay in the workplace or your home. We just had the case last year, the Bostock versus, the EEOC. One of those cases, the skydiver who unfortunately passed away, he was out here on Long Island. He was one of the three cases, so, we did the Civil Rights Act in 1964, yet, in 2019, we're still fighting. That case 2 years ago was about not being able to fire somebody because they're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. It was also about, housing. It was also about, equal pay. I mean, it was a variety of things. And here we are 30, 40 years from the Civil Rights Act, and we're still fighting these same battles. And I don't understand that. Edie couldn't understand it, and I can't understand it.
And today, do you still feel there's a lot of discrimination against the LGBTQ community, or do you think that's dramatically changed? Because here in New York and in the Hamptons, it seems as if it's dramatically changed, but I can't say because I don't know what's happening in other parts of the country and the world.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's changed. One of the things, I work with many organizations, with LGBT youth and LGBT elders and transgender youth and whatever. It is still a huge problem today. New York is a little more loose, it's better, but there is someone killed almost on a daily basis. Trans women of color. There have been I think 360 people who have been killed this year alone. And, I talk to a lot of LGBTQ youth, and, they still struggle to come out. They're still, horrified and terrified to tell their parents. They are, teased at school. They are the, over 50% of the homeless youth on the street, because once you find out your child is gay, that's the only child that gets kicked out of their home. No kid gets kicked out of their home because they have a learning disability, or they have a disease, or they're a behavioral problem, or God forbid an opioid problem, or whatever. The only reason children get kicked out of their homes is because they're LGBTQ youth. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the LGBTQ elders. They're now going into assisted living and nursing homes, and they're having to go back into the closet because the people that they were peers with, they think back of their lives in 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Gay people were not accepted in those days. It was illegal to be gay. They printed, they didn't just arrest you. They printed your name in the newspaper. You were fired from your job. You're probably cut off from your family. So it goes full circle. And so we haven't gotten far.
It's very sad to hear all of this. And then for children, especially, because we have a hard enough time right now with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything going on in the world. And for parents not to accept their children because of gender identity, or that would be in the case of a transgender child, but because a child is part of the LGBTQ community, I think it's a crime, really, because parents have to give love and they have to give understanding, and we are all human beings. And so what advice would you give to young people who are just starting a family and maybe they have children and they see changes in their children's sexual preference,
Mhm.
what would you suggest that they do to make their child feel most loved and most wanted? In my estimation, it would be just to give a lot of love and support
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
tell them that it's okay.
Yeah, that's it's that simple. It's that simple. It's love, it's support. It's also, not just saying, okay, my kid's gay, but also, maybe reading a book or watching, a movie that has some LGBT characters, or, there's a lot of organizations out there. There's PFLAG, which is, parents of lesbian and gays. There's SAGE, which is senior advocacy for gay elders. There's the LGBT Center. There's the Harvey Milk High School. There are so many resources out there. So I could plug the Edie Windsor Center, which is going to be the new healthcare center at Southampton Hospital, which I'm extremely proud of. But there are so many resources out there and so much information out there. These children, they're not committing a crime. They just want to love who they want to love.
I agree completely.
It's that simple. It's
I
that
agree.
simple.
Yes, I agree with you completely that if you're an LGBTQ
Mhm.
person, then
love.
you should be entitled to love who you want to love. We all need to love who we want to love. And what we're really missing right now in our world is kindness and understanding. And I think we come closer to understanding life when we allow people to be who they want to be. I want to move back to the transgender community.
Sure.
I've always read that they're having a very, very difficult time here in New York and really around the world. And what can we do to help that community?
Again, it goes back to the organizations and it goes back through the networking. Interestingly enough, I came out to Southampton in March, and somebody I know from Callan Lord in New York had one of her patients from New Jersey out in Montauk, and they went to several general practitioners and several doctors, and they really didn't have the wherewithal to really take care of this child and give them the hormones and things that these transgender children need. And she called me and she's like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, let me call the Edie Windsor Center. And sure enough, we found them a doctor. We saved this child's life.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about the Edie Windsor Center at Southampton Hospital? I understand after Edie passed away, Southampton Hospital came to you and asked you to get involved. Tell our audience a little bit about that center and exactly what it is. I know it means so much to you and you're very, very involved. And now the Southampton Hospital is the Stony Brook Southampton Hospital. And I know it's a top priority for the hospital. Healthcare in general, I'm on the board of the Southampton Hospital Association, and I know what a great job this hospital does to care for everyone in the community, regardless of their background or their finances. It's a hospital that allows everyone, and everyone comes in and everyone is treated equally and fairly. But tell us a little bit about the Edie Windsor Center, please.
Well, thank you for asking, since I did two shameless plugs on the Edie Windsor Center. The Southampton Hospital had an HIV and AIDS center. And when Edie passed away, the board and several people from Southampton Hospital called me and asked me if they could change it to the Edie Windsor Center. And I said, I have a couple of conditions. And they said, what is your conditions? And I said, it needs to be changed from an HIV and AIDS center to cover full LGBTQ people. So it has to be HIV and AIDS, it has to be LGBT youth, LGBT elders, transgender youth. And then I said to Bob and Steve Bernstein, most important, healthcare, mental health care services. And sadly, that's where we are. I think a normal person would have anxiety this year. So, some of the LGBT children who now have to be at home with parents who are unkind to them, or have to be, or missing hormone appointments because of COVID, mental health services is going to be a very significant issue going forward. And,
no question.
Yeah.
Mental health issues because of this pandemic
absolutely
are going to be even greater a bigger problem than before, unfortunately. But what we all need to do is try to support one another, show kindness. And there is a lot of fear. I don't think there's a person on the face of this earth who's not afraid of the COVID virus. And right now, with the vaccine slowly being rolled out, everyone's very excited about the possibilities of the end of this pandemic, but still we need to be very, very careful, regardless of who you are and what you do. We all have to wear masks, we have to social distance, and then we have to keep washing our hands. Now, getting back to our guest, Judith Kasen-Windsor, she's an advocate and an activist in the LGBTQ community. She's giving us a little insight into the life that she has, and then the life she had with Edie Windsor, who was a great reformer for the LGBTQ community in allowing or getting legislation passed for the marriage of same-sex individuals. So now, getting back to you and your life, and and how you're handling this pandemic. Are you able to handle it? And what advice would you give to our listeners?
Day at a time. I mean, not that I'm you just have to take it as it comes, and and listen to the scientists and listen to the doctors, and you should be exercising, you should be volunteering. There's plenty of things to do, that don't require, of course, wear your mask or whatever, but there are things that you can do. I've done a lot of volunteering. I've done a lot of Zoom calls. I was very active in some of the political campaigns. I am always in contact with all the LGBTQ organizations, always working on something like that. You keep yourself busy, and there's plenty of things to do. There's meals to be delivered. There's medication that can be, that is another thing that I talked about with the Edie Windsor Center, is I said, I want it to also be, not just a center for LGBTQ. I want it to be a center for everybody, where if somebody, can't really get to CVS or get to the drugstore and get their medication, to have a whole network. Or if you need a flu shot, you should be able to go to the Edie Windsor Center and get your flu shot. And the Edie Windsor Center is, a center that everybody can go to. And it's sort of a conduit into the hospital, where you could get a general practitioner or a gynecologist or a urologist or a cardiologist. I want everybody to, be using this center. And what is so important is, I want people to be checking on the elderly in this time. It's one thing, kids have video games, and they can FaceTime with their friends, and they can TikTok, and they can do some things, but there's some older people out there that I think are quite lonely, and maybe we even visit them through a window. There's definitely things that can be done, and that's another thing I would like with the Edie Windsor Center out here. We have a nice, beautiful, small knit community out here, but we just need to really start to connect with each other.
So important. And now, regarding fundraising for the Edie Windsor Center, are you involved in that effort? I understand, and I've been to some of your events, you have a barbecue every May. Do you think you'll be having that this year? And for our viewers who want to donate, how can they do that?
I hope we are able to have the Edie Windsor Backyard Barbecue. It's always the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. That is something that Edie and Thea bought this house in 1968. And they have always had a party the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend to bring the community back together. People go back to the city, or they go back to the Queens, or they go back to wherever they did. But then when they come here, Edie and Thea always had this party, and it was to bring the community back together. So I hope we can have it this year, because unfortunately we couldn't have it last year, and we weren't prepared to go virtual, and nobody knew what to do. But this year, at least we could go virtual. In order to donate, you can always donate to Southampton Hospital specifically. You can earmark it for the Edie Windsor Center, or also Edie Windsor has a website, and it has all of her philanthropic things that are named after her. She has about a dozen or so things that are named after her, and one of them is the Edie Windsor Healthcare Center, and you can click right on there, and you can donate.
Yes, and many of our viewers, they may not have the funds to write a large check, but remember, even a very tiny donation, collectively, all these donations together make a big difference. Now, what about volunteers? Are you accepting volunteers to work at the center, or is there a way that they can help out virtually through Zoom? Because right now, as things really seem to be tightening up even more and more with the COVID pandemic, what opportunities do you offer for volunteers?
Right now, we're kind of in transition. They are moving, the Edie Windsor Center now is over by Southampton Hospital on Meeting House Lane. They're moving it over to Hampton Bays. There's an atrium over there, and they're going to have several office facilities. They're taking over that atrium. And the reason why we put it in Hampton Bays is because we looked at the demographics of the people who use the Edie Windsor Center. And, it was from Islip to Montauk. So instead of putting it where Southampton Hospital is, closer to Southampton, we put it in Hampton Bays because that was more geographically desirable for it to be there. So we're in transition, and, we're going to have more than double the amount of space. There's going to be several rooms for, social workers, and then there's also going to be some light medical care. We have doctors who have volunteered X amount of days or X amount of hours who will be there on site. So if you go in there with a sinus infection or something small where you really kind of don't want to go into the hospital, but you can go over there, and certainly they can help you with that.
Well, that's very exciting. And when do you expect that the center will open up in Hampton Bays?
It is supposed to open up the end of February, but I have, how construction goes. So I have a feeling it's going to be probably, the ribbon cutting will probably hopefully be early March, mid-March, something of that nature. We might do a soft opening and have, a local kind of thing, but I'd like the opening to be much bigger. I'd like to have, invite more people, have more people come, whether they be political or activists or whoever. I'd like to have a bigger opening at some point. If I can't have the event Memorial Day weekend, I'll push it back throughout the summer. I've done all kinds of things to raise money for the Edie Windsor Center. I've done I've done a silent auction where I donated this house, and somebody took this house, and it was their largest auction item, which shocked me, but I was thrilled. It was their largest, priced auction item, and these two women couples came here and stayed here for a weekend, and I gave them an extra day, and everything was great. I'll do anything I can possibly do to raise money for the Edie Windsor Center. And I agree with you, and I'll quote Edie very quickly, that she always used to say, you did it with dollars, and it matters. Every dollar matters. So when I talk to people about fundraising, they're like, I don't have that kind of money. I'm like, you don't buy a sweater at the Gap. It's $25. Like, it adds up. You think about some of, the political campaigns. They do this on, I get these things, chip in $1, chip in $3, chip in $5, chip in $7. Every dollar matters. It adds up.
No question. And
you have to write these big checks. You write these small checks. I write small checks and big checks all the time.
Yes, and I say to my audience always, never feel that your smaller donations are insignificant, because collectively they add up and they create change. And so today's guest is a very, very interesting woman. She's carrying on the legacy of her former spouse, Edith Windsor, and she's really helping to shape the entire community out here and making a safe haven and a place for members of the LGBTQ community to go, to get medical care, to get psychological care, and to really help. So, Judith, we have a few minutes left. What advice do you want to give to the next generation? How can they help you? How can they get involved? And let's talk a little bit about acceptance and the willingness to be accepting and to move forward, so that we don't go backwards, but that we move forward.
Right. Just, be involved, stay engaged, know what's going on in your community, whether it's your next door neighbor, whether it's the person 2 doors down that has a pride flag in front of their house and, you know, somebody's harassing them, you know, whether it's big or small, just stay engaged in what's going on. Don't ever take anything for granted. Rights, human rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, you know, civil rights, they're very fragile. Don't ever take them for granted. They could, things could happen.
Yes, and the rights of all beings matter. And we've had a
Absolutely.
lot of problems this year or in 2020 concerning racial justice. Well, the rights of all human beings matter. And Judith, I have one final question. Who's on the wall behind you?
That is the indomitable Edie Windsor herself. That was the same picture that we used for her memoir, A Wild and Precious Life. That is the picture where she was Time Magazine's Person of the Year, runner-up to the Pope in 2013. You know, Edie changed the game.
She sure did. With us on today's episode of Successful Philanthropy was Judith Kasen-Windsor. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.